The fall leaves crunched under Marissa Hale's boots as she stepped onto her parents' front porch in Greenville, North Carolina. For the first time in 6 years, the last voicemail from her mother had ended with, "If you ever find your way back here, try not to embarrass us." Before I go on, please share where you're watching from in the comments and hit the subscribe button if you enjoy family stories about setting boundaries and finding strength in tough times. The wind was gentler. Then she remembered, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and the heavier, sweet trace of someone's fireplace 3 doors down. She stood for a long moment before knocking, her suitcase resting beside her like a question left unasked. Elaine Hale opened the door with a look somewhere between surprise and preparation. Her lipstick was a touch too red for the daylight, and her eyes traveled quickly from Marissa's face to her plain navy coat. "Well," she said, not quite smiling, "look who finally decided to visit." Marissa managed a polite nod. "Hi, Mom. You're just in time. I still haven't changed your quilt. That old thing's probably dusty, but I figured you'd want it." Inside, the house had settled into itself. The same oak chairs flanked the same dining table, still centered beneath the faded brass chandelier. A faint scent of cinnamon lingered. Elaine's potpourri, always a season ahead. Richard Hale appeared in the hallway with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and an unread newspaper in his hand. He offered a nod and muttered, "Chilly ride down from D.C. "Mild," Marissa said. "Took the back roads." The conversation lapsed there, the same way it had lapsed 6 years ago when she left. Her old room looked as though it had been paused rather than preserved. The quilt, flannel with hand-stitched autumn leaves, covered the bed, and the bookshelf still held her childhood copies of Nancy Drew and a high school photo frame turned face down. She unpacked without comment, neatly placing folded clothes into the same drawers she once shoved homework into. That morning, she'd stopped at Dawson's Market to grab a bottle of ginger ale. It was there, between the refrigerated biscuits and the peanut butter, that Joni Miller had cornered her. Joni was shorter now, her cane clicking steadily with every other step. Her cart was filled with dented soup cans and a single slice of chocolate cake in a plastic dome. When her phone refused to load a weather app, Marissa fixed it with 2 taps. Joni smiled widely. "Wish more young folks had patience like you. These things are smarter than I most days." Marissa had just smiled. "It's nothing." But Joni looked at her a second longer. "It ain't nothing to be kind." Back at the house, Elaine reheated leftover roast beef for dinner and set the table without comment. She updated Marissa on Bradley's new promotion at the bank and how cousin Renee had just bought a house in Charlotte. "They're coming over Sunday," Elaine said, pouring sweet tea with the kind of cheer that sounded practiced. "Bradley's bringing that girl he's been seeing. I thought it'd be nice for you two to reconnect." Marissa didn't comment. She hadn't spoken to Bradley in 4 years, longer, if silence could be measured. After dinner, she offered to help with the dishes, but Elaine waved her off. "No need. You just got here. We'll have time." It was the same tone she'd used when Marissa had asked, years ago, if her deployment to Germany mattered. "We'll have time." But time had come and gone and circled back, empty as ever. The next morning dawned crisp and quiet. Marissa woke early, dressed, and stepped outside. Before the others stirred, the porch boards creaked familiarly underfoot. Across the street, a man walked a dog in silence, nodding politely. The town hadn't shrunk, but it hadn't grown either. At the edge of the yard, Joni appeared again, cardigan wrapped around her like armor, a paper bag swinging from her arm. "Still up early, huh?" she said with a small grin. "Some habits stick." Joni stepped closer. "I told my niece about you. Told her there's still good bones in this town. That not everybody just talks a big game." Marissa gave her a curious look. "Your niece? She works up in D.C., some company with big glass walls and no coffee that tastes right. You'll meet her soon enough." Marissa didn't press. Joni always had a way of knowing more than she let on. "Don't let them shrink you, sugar," Joni said, tapping her cane against the fence post. "You're taller than they remember." Marissa held that sentence longer than she meant to, nodding once before turning back to the house. She glanced at the front door, half open, as if someone had been watching, then quietly closed it behind her. The dining table was set for 6, but the conversation had room for only 5. Steam rose from the sweet potato pie like a quiet offering no one mentioned. The turkey had been sliced with surgical precision, its platter centered perfectly beside a green bean casserole topped with crunchy onions. Marissa could tell Elaine had started cooking before dawn. Everything was too prepared, too practiced. Frank Sinatra crooned from the old stereo in the corner, and yet nothing about the atmosphere felt particularly relaxed. Bradley arrived late, arms full of laughter and cologne, Renee trailing behind him in a navy wool coat and polite smile. Elaine lit the candles before welcoming them to the table as if it were a state event. "Now we're complete," she announced, motioning for Bradley to sit beside her. Marissa found herself wedged at the far end, between Richard and a hutch full of unused crystal, so, Elaine said brightly, Renee just closed on a 2-story. In Charlotte. With a yard. Tell them about the porch, dear. Renee demurred modestly but shared a few lines about the neighborhood and how hard it is to find a decent mortgage broker these days. Elaine nodded like she'd been part of the process. Bradley chimed in next. Work just bumped me up to regional consultant. 6 counties. Lots of travel. He reached for the salt without asking and dusted his turkey with it. Elaine beamed. My son, making waves. I always knew he had leadership in him. I just got moved to lead project strategy, Marissa said, tone even, voice low enough to require leaning in. Oh, that reminds me, Elaine cut in, turning to Renee, do you remember the Halsteads from church? Their grandson just got a job with NASA. Renee blinked, then nodded politely. Marissa sat back, folding her hands in her lap, her fingers fidgeting lightly beneath the table. She let the rest of the sentence dissolve in her throat. Richard stabbed his green beans absently, scrolling on his phone with the other hand. Occasionally, he mumbled an agreement with whatever praise Elaine heaped upon Bradley or Renee, but his eyes never lifted. Still doing your thing in D.C.? Renee asked during a lull. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. I am, Marissa replied. We've got a presentation tomorrow at Grandwood. Bradley, remember the neighbor with the big Labrador? Elaine interrupted. You used to chase that poor dog with your water gun. She laughed, tapping her glass. Bradley chuckled. Only because Marissa was terrified of it. Everyone laughed at that. Everyone but Marissa. She quit track after one race, remember, he added, leaning back in his chair, his smile wide. Did one lap and said she was more of a thinker. Elaine dabbed her eyes like the memory had touched her. She always had her nose in a book. That's our Marissa. Marissa glanced at the clock. The roast was cold by now, but no one noticed. She reached for her water and drank slowly, hoping to swallow something heavier than liquid. She caught Renee looking at her, not with pity, but with a kind of helpless discomfort. You must enjoy the flexibility in your job? Renee asked. Marissa tilted her head slightly. Sure. There wasn't anything else to say. Elaine lifted her wine glass. To our shining stars, Bradley and Renee. Thank God this family's not entirely a disappointment. There was a pause that felt like a blink in slow motion. Marissa reached for her napkin. She folded it once, sharply, then again, her movements precise. The edges aligned perfectly, corner to corner, until it formed a clean triangle. Then she placed it beside her untouched plate, the linen forming a quiet salute. Marissa silently folds her napkin in a sharp, exact triangle, military style, and places it beside her untouched plate. Mistress Hale, the boardroom is prepped, said the young intern, opening the glass door with trembling hands. Marissa offered a brief nod, the same one she gave to air traffic controllers and senior advisors, then walked past him with practiced ease. The heels of her shoes echoed down the sleek hallway, every step swallowed by the matte tile in silent respect. Her ID badge, federal, laminated, discreet, flashed as she passed the retinal scanner. Grandwood Systems headquarters exuded modern ambition. Glass walls, brushed steel fixtures, soft jazz humming overhead. On the far side of the atrium, a coffee cart buzzed with employees murmuring over espressos and scones. No one paid much attention to her, but the receptionist did straighten when she saw the name on Marissa's tag. The boardroom smelled faintly of lemon polish. The walnut table stretched nearly the length of the room, surrounded by ergonomic chairs and backed by 3 projection screens already flickering with charts. A technician looked up and offered a salute-like nod. Marissa reviewed her notes, calm, contained, meticulous. She had already met with security staff that morning, verified compliance logs, and signed off on site integrity. Her duty was clear, to evaluate the financial and ethical readiness of Grandwood's regional contracts. A door opened behind her. Miss Hale, said Evelyn Drake, stepping inside, thank you for coming in person. Marissa stood to shake her hand. Evelyn, CEO of Grandwood, wore tailored gray and a purposeful gaze. Her voice held weight, not just from authority but from experience. Marissa had met her twice before, always in rooms with thick folders and little patience. Happy to assist, Marissa replied. Especially on a contract of this scale. They exchanged a few quiet updates. Evelyn noted that the presentation would begin shortly, that senior teams had been briefed but not told in advance about oversight attendance. Sometimes clarity arrives better as a surprise, she said. At exactly 9 a.m., the side doors opened. Richard Hale stepped in first, adjusting his blazer, followed closely by Bradley, who was already talking. And if we lead with the integration plan, we can tie it into the budget summary cleanly, he said. Then he looked up and stopped short. Marissa? Richard froze beside him. Evelyn turned. Gentlemen, this is Ms. Hale, Federal Oversight Lead for this quarter's contract review. For a moment, the room was airless. She'll be evaluating all proposal components, Evelyn continued. Her clearance grants full access, so please be thorough. Bradley's mouth opened and shut like a hinge with no oil. Richard coughed into his fist, then moved toward the far side of the table, eyes flicking between Marissa and the screens like trying to rewire a memory. Marissa didn't smile. She offered a polite glance, then returned her attention to the agenda. Bradley's team began their slideshow. Slides changed with the click of a remote, but his rhythm faltered. He stumbled over the acronym for the cybersecurity module. When Marissa asked for clarification on subcontractor vetting, he blinked and turned to a colleague, then corrected himself. Richard watched her closely, his notes untouched. Marissa's voice was measured. I'd also like a copy of the updated compliance timeline. The one in your executive summary is dated September. Yes, of course. I have it here somewhere. Bradley fumbled through his folder. No one laughed. The staff around the table only watched, silently reconfiguring what they knew. Marissa made no show of authority. She asked fair questions, held a steady gaze, and took meticulous notes. Evelyn intervened only once, to adjust the screen brightness. The meeting ended as smoothly as it had begun. Chairs creaked as people stood. Papers shuffled into briefcases. Evelyn walked to the head of the table again. And Richard, she said with a small smile, you should be proud. Not many parents get to present their work to their child. Richard Hale stared at the half-empty mug of coffee on the kitchen counter, long after it had gone cold. The light above the stove cast a muted glow across the room, highlighting the swirls of steam rising from the sink where Elaine quietly washed dishes. Outside, the porch light flickered, and a breeze tossed leaves across the brick steps. The air held the stillness of something fragile, like glassware balanced too close to the edge. Marissa sat at the end of the kitchen table, posture straight, fingers wrapped around a glass of water she hadn't touched. She didn't look tired, but she looked distant, as if her thoughts had left the room hours ago and hadn't yet come back. Richard finally spoke. Why didn't you tell us? Marissa lifted her eyes to meet his. I never hid, she said softly. I just wasn't heard. Elaine dried her hands on a towel she'd already folded twice. We all have our paths, she offered, voice attempting warmth but landing closer to resignation. Some just take different turns. Bradley leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, face tighter than usual. So you're the one deciding if I keep my job? His tone wasn't accusatory. It was thinner, like he'd finally run out of volume to raise. I'm the one evaluating compliance, Marissa said calmly. That's different from deciding anyone's fate. Your work still speaks for itself. Bradley scoffed, then seemed to regret it. You were just quiet. You always left the room before dessert. Skipped family reunions. I didn't even know where you lived last year. I lived in the same city for 5 years, she said. My address hasn't changed since I started federal service. Elaine turned, voice cracking slightly. You never shared any of this. Not with me. Marissa blinked slowly. Do you remember the last time I tried? Elaine looked away. Richard sat down, rubbing the side of his temple. I just thought. You were doing okay. Enough. You assumed, Marissa said. That's not the same. No one spoke for a while. The clock ticked. A car passed on the street. The porch light buzzed faintly overhead, casting a low amber tint through the window blinds. Elaine returned to the counter and began folding the dish towel again. Her fingers fumbled with the corners, refolding what didn't need fixing. We're proud, she whispered, just, maybe not in the ways you needed us to be. Marissa didn't answer right away. She looked at the table, the faint water ring left by someone's glass, the salt shaker slightly askew. I don't need an apology, she said finally, her voice even. I need to know this house can hold more than one kind of success. The room exhaled something heavy. Bradley shifted, pushing off the wall. He looked like someone who had studied for the wrong exam. I don't even know who you are, he whispered. Marissa looked up at him, her gaze steady. That's because no one ever asked. Joni stood at the front gate with a pecan pie and a memory. You fixed my printer when no one else would. Marissa set down her clippers and brushed her palms against the sides of her jeans. The porch steps creaked softly as she descended, blinking against the bright morning light. Joni was wrapped in a knitted cardigan the color of faded rose petals, white sneakers carefully tied, the foil-covered pie balanced delicately in her wrinkled hands. Well, it wouldn't print the church bulletin, Joni said, stepping forward. And without that bulletin, the choir would have been humming in the wrong key for weeks. Marissa let out a breath of soft laughter. You're exaggerating. Am I? Joni winked. Or are you just finally getting used to being seen? They walked into the house together. Marissa held the door open as Joni passed, the scent of pecans and sugar drifting in behind her. The kitchen clock chimed noon as the kettle on the stove began its low whistle. Marissa turned down the burner and set 2 mismatched mugs on the table. Joni lowered herself into a chair with a small grunt. I didn't just come for tea, she said, patting her pocket. though I won't say no to it. Marissa poured the water, dropped in a pair of tea bags, and waited. You know Evelyn, my girl, Joni began, voice casual but anchored. Hard woman to surprise. But one day, she visited me, brought groceries. I'd been going on and on about the kind girl next door who brought in my mail, reset my modem, and even sat with me when my hip gave out. Marissa turned, uncertain. You told her, about me? Oh, sugar, Joni smiled, tapping the table with her fingers. I didn't just tell her. I bragged. Said you were the sort who helped without ever waiting to be noticed. Said you had more sense than a roomful of men twice your age. Marissa pulled out the chair across from her and Saturday. I didn't know she was your daughter. That's because you weren't trying to impress anyone. Joni leaned forward. And that's why she remembered you. From the hallway, a quiet creak betrayed a listener. Elaine stood just beyond the edge of the wall, one hand resting against the trim, her face unreadable. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, at least not at first, but the mention of Evelyn's name held her in place. Joni kept talking. You weren't hired because you dazzled in some interview, though I'm sure you did fine. You were hired because someone believed in the kind of person who shows up without being asked. Evelyn said, Mama, you know I trust your gut. If she's half what you say, I want her on my side. Marissa stared at the steam curling up from her mug. Her fingers tightened slightly around the handle. I just did what anyone would do, she said quietly. Joni clicked her tongue. That's where you're wrong. Not everyone helps a limping old woman to her car in 90-degree heat. Not everyone waits while she forgets the Wi-Fi password. Not everyone looks you in the eye and listens. Kindness echoes, sugar. It always comes back. Elaine stepped into view slowly, as if unsure whether she had the right to interrupt. Her hands were empty. Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing. She looked at Joni, then at her daughter, and sat gently on the stairs without a word. No one filled the silence. After a while, Joni rose with effort. I'll leave you too, she said, sliding her hand across the table as if brushing away crumbs of memory. She touched Marissa's hand. She finally sees you now. But I always did. 6 months later, the smell of roast chicken filled Marissa's apartment as laughter bubbled from the dining table. A spring breeze drifted in through the cracked balcony door, carrying with it the distant sounds of the National Mall, tourists chatting, a saxophonist playing under the trees, a child laughing somewhere below. Marissa moved easily through the open kitchen, oven mittens in one hand, a serving dish in the other. The table behind her glowed under the soft chandelier light, set with mismatched dishes, cloth napkins, and sprigs of rosemary tied with twine. Elaine was mid-story. So there she is, 6 years old, trying to iron her doll's dress with a curling iron, burns a hole right through it. Everyone laughed, even Marissa, who added, and you let me keep using it. Well, we had to see if you'd learn, Elaine said, her voice more playful than it used to be. Bradley reached for another helping of honey-glazed carrots. So, this program you're leading, he began, is it true you've got clearance above state level? Marissa raised an eyebrow. Not above, parallel. And technically, I can't confirm that. Bradley grinned, then grew thoughtful. Still, that's impressive. You think I should take that data ethics course they're offering? Marissa nodded. Yes. And not just for the resume. Joni sipped her iced tea, the peach cobbler already half gone in front of her. What I like best, she said, is that y'all didn't ask her to cook the whole thing. She tapped the rim of her glass. Sharing the load, now that's real growth. Richard chuckled, shifting in his chair. You're one to talk. You made that cobbler disappear before I even got seconds. Oh please, Joni waved him off. You're lucky I brought it at all. This woman could make the White House menu feel underseasoned. On a side table, next to a small vase of tulips, sat a framed printout. Veteran Strategist Heads National Initiative, read the headline, beneath a black and white photo of Marissa shaking hands with a senator. Richard had brought it, carefully pressed between cardboard, and now it sat next to Bradley's bouquet of lilacs and Elaine's cornbread casserole. All gestures, none grand, but each sincere. As plates emptied and conversation meandered, Marissa leaned back in her chair, watching the way her family now paused when she spoke, waited for her answer, listened with something close to curiosity instead of expectation. The apartment was modest, nothing fancy, but the air inside felt settled, unforced. Like something earned. Richard stood slowly, glass in hand. To Mistress Hale, he said, smiling across the table. Not because of her title, but because of the dignity she never had to demand. Everyone raised their glasses, and for a moment, silence held. Then Joni leaned over, touching Marissa's hand with fingers soft as linen. You built a new table, sweetheart. And look, they learned how to sit at it. Thank you for joining us on Marissa's journey, a story about being unseen, misunderstood, and yet finding strength in kindness and resilience. What have you learned so far? Is there a moment in your life when you felt underestimated but proved your worth in your way? Please share one lesson you'll carry forward in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else who needs to hear it. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more heartfelt stories of courage and hope. Remember, sometimes the most important table to build is the one where everyone feels they belong. See you in the next video.